Ken?
Good morning to those who are here in the hearing room in Edinburgh and those who are following proceedings on YouTube. Now, I think we're ready to begin, Mr. McClellan.
That's right, my lord. Just straight into the first witness for today, who's Stewart McKechnie.
Jennifer, do you just...
Morning.
Good morning again, Mr. McKechnie. Now, as you're familiar with now, you're about to be asked questions by Mr. McClellan, but first of all, you're prepared to affirm.
Yes. Yep.
Just sitting where you are, would you repeat these words after me? I solemnly, sincerely, and truly
I solemnly, sincerely, and truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that the evidence that I will give
that the evidence I will give
will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. McKechnie. Mr. McClellan.
Thank you, my lord. Good morning.
Morning.
Could you please just confirm your name?
Stewart McKechnie.
And you are a mechanical and electrical engineer, is that correct?
Primarily a mechanical engineer, yes.
And you're employed by TÜV Süd, having worked for TÜV Süd Wallace Whittle on the RHCYP DCN project.
Yes.
And you gave evidence to this inquiry previously at its oral hearings in 2023. And have you provided the inquiry with a further witness statement for this set of hearings?
I have.
If we could please have up on the screen Witness Statement Bundle, Volume 2, page 162. And you should see up on the screen there, Mr. McKechnie, your statement.
Yes.
Does that statement set out fully and truthfully your evidence on the matters that it addresses?
It does.
And is there anything in it that you think needs to be changed or corrected?
No.
Now, you'll no doubt recall that at the previous hearing, we discussed your involvement in the project up to financial close when
Yes.
the project agreement was signed.
Yep.
And today, I would like to focus on the period after financial close.
Yep.
You describe yourself as having been the building services design lead for TÜV Süd Wallace Whittle on the project. Is that correct?
Yes.
So you led the team which was responsible for producing the design for the ventilation systems in that hospital.
Yes.
Now, the design process after financial close was carried out in the context of a particular contractual framework. And the precise meaning of the contract surrounding that it's a legal matter, and it's really a matter for the lawyers. So the inquiry and the core participants can form their own views about that. But what I would like to do, however, is to ask you how you understood it when you were working on the project. So it was the case, wasn't it, that the ventilation design was not complete at financial close? So,
Yes. Yep.
so it had to be developed to a state of completion after financial close.
That's correct. Yep.
And the development of that design was primarily Wallace Whittle's responsibility.
Yes, it was.
And NHS Lothian were entitled to be consulted about that design as it was developed. And there was a contractual process for doing that.
Yes.
That was the reviewable design data, or RDD
That's
process.
correct. Yep.
And the contract made provision for various things to go through the RDD process. And included amongst those were your ventilation design and the environmental matrix.
That's correct. Yep.
So both of these had to be developed and approved via the RDD process.
That was the way it turned out. Yes.
What did you understand to be the purpose of the RDD process?
The RDD process is a reasonably common process on the basis that, particularly in these larger contracts, the designs are generally not complete, because as you could imagine, that the designing any system for a large hospital takes a reasonable amount of time and resource. Therefore, what you tend to do is you prepare strategy details, which is what we did in Edinburgh, to show what the design intent would be. You then, if you're successful or your team's successful in landing the contract, you then launch into the detailed design, which is size and ductwork and all the other bits and pieces that we have to do. So,
and what did you understand to be the purpose of consulting NHS Lothian in the RDD process?
The RDD process was led by MOTS. NHSL weren't always there in the reviews, although generally the drawings or whatever that we produced would have been taken away and then signed by the MOTS and the NHSL team.
And what did you understand to be the purpose of NHSL's sign-off of the designs?
The sign-off process is, again, to my mind, this one was no different from any other one I've been involved in, was an acknowledgement by the client that what we were putting forward met with their expectations.
A point made by some of the parties involved in this inquiry is that NHSL's sign-off under the RDD process had only limited significance, that it was no more than confirmation that the approved item met their requirements for operational functionality. Was that your understanding?
I have only recently looked into the phrase operational functionality, simply because I don't recall it ever being mentioned in any of the RDD reviews. So we approached the RDD sessions, let's call them, the same as we would with any other ones, which was to put forward our proposals to the client body. The operational functionality, to be frank, I still don't, having read it a couple of times now, I still don't see its relevance to engineering systems.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's kind of the next point I was going to make, that it sounds from what you're saying that you have had a look at the contract definition of operational functionality.
I have, yes.
And it runs to maybe a page and a half or so.
Yes, it does.
Yes. And would it be fair to sort of summarise it as being concerned with the layout of the hospital, the adjacencies of departments and rooms within them, and the location of equipment, insofar as those things affected the health board's use of the space?
That's absolutely my interpretation of the definition of operational functionality. Mm-hmm. As I say, it didn't feature, as far as I recall, it didn't feature at any time in the RDD review process.
And so just carrying on with that, the concept of operational functionality, would you agree that ventilation parameters like air changes and pressure gradients wouldn't fall within the concept of operational functionality?
Certainly not within my interpretation of what's written within the document. When this was first raised, I have to admit that I thought, well, the only relevance it could have with that phrase, but not with the interpretation, would have been the implications of ventilation rates or whatever. in that. But that's sheer conjecture because, as I say, it's only very recently that I know it was brought up in the last session, but we hadn't really delved into what we were, the process of RDD, etc., where it's now appears to be being linked.
Okay, so just to be clear about it, when you were actually working on the project, when you were submitting designs through the RDD process, you yourself at that time were not aware and not thinking about the concept of operational functionality?
No, not. We approached RDD in a similar vein, as did the other participants, in a similar way to any other RDD, which was looking at the proposals, which were then in a more detailed form.
In your witness statement, it's at paragraph 27, maybe bring it up, it's witness statement bundle 2, page 173. And what you say in paragraph 27 is you introduce the system of responses that the health board could have to any item submitted through the RDD process. Yes. And then you say, my understanding of the NHSL review was that they checked the designs submitted met their operational functionality requirement. And so far, that sentence is consistent with what witnesses from Mott MacDonald, for example, would say. But then you go on to say, which covered performance control and maintainability of the systems. Now, that understanding of operational functionality is different from the one that we discussed a moment ago. Which reflects your understanding of operational functionality?
To be frank, both. Because when the question that was put forward to me, and which that 27 is a response to, I think was along the lines of what was my interpretation of operational functionality and its application in the RDD process. So having scratched my head over this new phrase, that's what I would have said if operational functionality, taking that at face value, that's what that part of the review would be. It's certainly not restricted to those items, because for example, out with the ventilation systems, we had every other building services with water, electrical, lighting, all of that. They all went through the same RDD. And if it had only been restricted to that, I don't think that's reflected in the comments that we received on all our proposals.
I mean, at the end of the day, the meaning of operational functionality is a matter of the meaning of the contract. But the way you're describing it in your witness statement here, are you essentially describing the sort of issues that you understood NHSL and Mott MacDonald to be reviewing RDD items against?
They certainly reviewed more than what those three items that I've commented. All, as I say, my response was, and that's why I've phrased it as my understanding.
Yeah,
was that if they were looking at operational functionality, that was the only thing I could think of that would be applicable there.
Yeah. Okay. Because
at risk of just repeating back to you,
right.
Mr. McKechnie, what you've just said, you've agreed with Mr. McClellan. What the contract appears to say is the definition of operational functionality. If I'm following your evidence, you're pointing out that what was happening in practice during the RDD process included matters of performance control and
Maintainability, yep.
maintainability of the systems. In your view, that goes beyond operational functionality as defined in the contract. But you would also say that in practice, the RDDD process went even beyond performance control and maintainability. I'm really just saying back to you what I think you have said to me.
That's correct. When I wrote that, as I say, I was unfamiliar with the phrase.
Right.
Therefore, that was my interpretation of what operational functionality was until we went back to the packet information and downloaded all the contractual data and eventually found the definition within the contract of operational functionality, which, as you said a couple of minutes ago there, appears to be more biased towards adjacencies, entrances, what I would term as building layout.
Yeah.
I couldn't find anything in it which had any technical reference. And that's why I was struggling to get my head around about why that wasn't the process I was involved in.
Thank you.
I was interested just in the final word you used there, Mr. McKechnie, the process that you were involved in. Are you drawing a contrast between the breadth of topics under discussion through the RDD process and the much more limited contractual definition of operational functionality?
Absolutely.
And if we could go to page 172 of the bundles, just the page before, paragraph 21, you say that you're very familiar with the RDD process in general terms, and you explain that the design proposals are submitted to the client's technical advisor for review. The technical advisor then scrutinises the proposals for their compliance with the design brief or contractor's proposals. And any comments made by the technical advisor would require to be resolved to the client's team's satisfaction prior to construction. So I think you're talking there about RDD processes in general rather than the specific one on this project. But does that second last sentence reflect what you understood to be going on through the RHCYP RDD process? The technical advisor, which would have been Mott MacDonald, scrutinises the proposals for their compliance with the design brief or contractor's proposals.
Yes, that's correct. I didn't see any difference in the system that we were involved in on Edinburgh to any other RDD process I've been involved in. And I would say it wasn't, sorry, cut across you, but I would say it wasn't solely the technical advisors that signed off on the drawings. NHSL were also, there was a stamp which was applied to these drawings to give it the classification, and NHSL were party to the commenting and on the classification of the proposals.
Yes, and so would you then understand NHSL's stamp on these drawings to constitute their confirmation that the design brief, their confirmation that the submitted proposal complied with the design brief?
Yes, yep.
So in order to prepare a design, you and your team obviously had to have a brief. And you say that you understood the environmental matrix at financial close to be your brief and to form part of the board's construction requirements. Is that correct?
The environmental matrix was recorded as part of the BCRs, yes.
So that the environmental matrix, that was the design brief that you were working to, or at least part of it.
Yes.
But the environmental matrix was itself subject to the RDD process. So on your understanding, we've got both the contractor's design and the client's brief informing it, going through the RDD process together. Was that how you understood it?
My understanding was that the environmental matrix, which we were told we had to adopt, was the client's brief. And we built our designs on to suit the requirements of that briefing document.
But if the briefing document itself is subject to the RDD process, how do you know what the brief is?
It's a good question, and one that I raised myself at the time, that the only value I could see in continuing the matrix was that if there was change of use to a particular area or rooms, then that provided a vehicle for recording that change of, what we'll call it, change of brief. And that was the only reason I could see for keeping that going.
So on your I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so all I'm doing is I'm just reflecting back what I understood you to mean. So on your understanding, the RDD process was also in part a process of finalising the client's brief.
Yes, it could have that function, but that to me wasn't the reason for having an environmental matrix. The matrix conveys the briefing, which the client should have been or would have been measuring our designs against.
But I'm just wondering if it's a workable arrangement to have not only the contractor's proposals going through the RDD process, but also the part of the client's brief going through the same process. I mean, is that workable in your view?
I don't think so, and I didn't think so at the time in the way that the RDD and the matrix seemed to progress. A better explanation of that would be when we, with my arm on my back, took on board the matrix, we found it extremely confusing when the first version of that matrix was returned with comments, because the only conclusion you can bring from that was that the client was then commenting upon something they'd already briefed. So I don't think that's a workable solution at all, no.
Mm-hmm. And when that happened, when you got so many comments back on the matrix, I suppose there might be two ways that you could look at that. One is, we've got a client here who's changing their brief. That's one way of looking at it.
Yep.
The other way of looking at it is to say, we were wrong to understand this as the client's brief. I mean, do you accept those are two ways of looking at it?
I didn't think we were wrong.
I'm sorry?
Without sounding conceited, I didn't think we were wrong. It was a normal process to get a brief and then adopt the guidance from that brief.
Mm-hmm.
So we would normally always expect in this type of situation to be given a brief where there were specific things that the client was looking for.
So did you proceed on the understanding that all of these comments on the matrix reflected the client changing their brief?
Yes.
So just returning to this idea of the matrix going through the RDD process, it's obviously for the client to set a brief, but the RDD process functioned on the basis of the production by the contractor of a design. So who did you understand to be responsible in that process for choosing the parameters that go in the matrix?
In the initial matrix?
No, once the matrix starts going through the RDD process, and
Right,
there are new parameters going into it, who did you understand to be responsible for the choice of parameters?
Where those parameters were a change to what was already detailed within the matrix, I would have said that was the board's direction. Where, as it happened, there were some areas added to the brief, departments or whatever, which we compiled what we felt was the appropriate entries to be incorporated in the matrix. We did that, but then that portion of it was then represented to within the RDD process for the client to agree or direct otherwise on what our interpretation was of the particular requirements for these areas.
Okay, I mean, we can probably divide it into three different types of parameter. First of all, there's the pre-existing ones, the ones that were in the matrix at financial close. Who did you understand to be responsible for the choice of those parameters? Was that NHSL or was that you as a designer?
The initial one was NHSL. And I can tell you that the process for that was because I wasn't in favour of the matrix coming across and then being given a TUV badge on it. I said I was only willing to do that if they gave me an Excel of the then ECR presented matrix, which I then took and rebadged without altering the air changes, as we're talking about ventilation or whatever, and represented that. I could see why they were trying, or I thought I could see why they were trying to do it, which was that they were getting the IHSL team to adopt that briefing as their responsibility in terms of the performance. And that's not necessarily a different way of, an unusual way of doing things, because in other projects, a client will give a brief, but he wants you to formalise your acceptance of that brief, if you like, by putting it, incorporating it into your proposals. It then gives a yardstick.
I think this is, are you talking here about what happened prior to financial close?
No.
I just, when...
Oh, sorry, I'm not sure the timing of when it slipped into RDD.
I've had the benefit of looking at the transcript of your evidence from last year, and what you described at that time was, prior to financial close, the reference design environmental matrix was handed over to Wallace Whittle, and Wallace Whittle were asked to rebadge it, as you put it. And that was something that happened prior to financial close, if you recall.
It did, yeah. When it went in for RDD, if I remember correctly, because I was thinking back, we were into the history of the matrix. We were given a number of comments on the matrix, and I think that was then on the RDD submitted document. So we took on board those comments and resubmitted it, and then we got another bag of comments back.
Just stand a little bit back from that. I'm just trying to understand the extent to which you regarded Wallace Whittle as responsible for the parameters in the matrix, and to what extent you regarded anybody else as responsible for the choice of them. So we have the environmental matrix at financial close, and I think we now agree that that was one which Wallace Whittle had adopted as their own document, it having in origin been one produced by the board. Is that
adopted is the word that would use? Yes.
Yeah. So that matrix in the contract at financial close has a large number of parameters in it. Who did you regard as responsible for the choice of those parameters?
I would have said it was the NHSL choice there of the parameters, because we didn't vary those parameters. They were adopted as our design brief, if you like, when we were moving into the detailed design.
And then moving on through the RDD process, you explained that there were, I think, some new rooms added to the matrix as the design developed.
Yes.
And in relation to the selection of parameters for those rooms, who do you regard as responsible for the choice?
The initial proposal for these new rooms, let's call them, came from ourselves based on SHTM with 301 guidance. I'm sticking straight to the ventilation. Mm-hmm. However, that was then always put forward to the technical advisor team or through the RDD process for their agreement, if you like. And I do distinctly remember, having looked at this, where on some of the rooms, there perhaps wasn't an appropriate SHTM guidance on the room type. And in these instances, we recorded that we were defaulting to the 10 litres per second ventilation rate based on the occupancy. And we had a request to then change that terminology into air changes. So all of these reviews, all of these parameters were reviewed.
So for this second category of parameters, ones which Wallace Whittle add to the matrix as new rooms are developed, what I understood you to say was that Wallace Whittle were responsible for the selection of the parameters, but the matrix then went through the RDD process. And do you mean to say that that represented NHSL's approval of those parameters? Is that your understanding?
That was the process. We wouldn't have selected a parameter and then barged on with it without involving the client and explaining the background as to their thinking.
Mm-hmm. And then I think there's possibly a third category of parameter in the matrix, and that's where they're being changed in response to, as you would put it, a change in the client's brief. Now, in that context, who did you regard as responsible for the choice of parameters?
I would say that was quite clearly any further changes that we made to the matrix was due to a response by NHSL, which we would then take on board and revise the matrix accordingly.
Yes. And so again, as that goes through the RDD process, was it your understanding that NHSL were responsible for the choice of those parameters?
Yeah.
Now, in relation to all of those parameters, all three types, to what extent were TÜV Süd or Wallace Whittle as the designers checking all of those for compliance with guidance?
In the first instance, no, sorry, all three of them would have been checked by my team against guidance, and if there's any clarification required on a particular aspect, we would have raised that through the multiplex.
So, no matter what the origin of the parameter, was your team essentially taking responsibility for the compliance of them with guidance?
Yes, I would say so.
It may be helpful just to look at Bundle 1, page 1399. In fact, if you just go to 1381, please. You see up on screen there, Mr. McKechnie, the Toothsoods appointment by multiplex for the project. Then if we go back to page 1399.
Thank you.
So this is clause 4.3.1 of the appointment. And just to read that, the consultant, that's Toothsood Wallace Whittle, acknowledges and confirms that it has conducted its own analysis and review of the disclosed data and has, before the execution of this agreement, satisfied itself as to the accuracy, completeness, and fitness for purpose of any such disclosed data upon which it places reliance. There is a definition of disclosed data which we can go to if you like, but would you regard the work that your team was doing in checking the parameters for compliance with guidance would be in fulfilment of that obligation?
Yes, but I would say that's exactly what we did.
Yeah. Now, in your statement, you say that the environmental matrix developed in a manner which you would regard as being out of the ordinary for an RDD process. Is that right?
Yes.
And as I've understood your statement, you described two unusual features in particular. First of all, a fluctuation in the approval status of the matrix, in that it was approved and then it was unapproved and then it was approved again, and so on. And the second aspect is that the process of review seemed to rumble on through various stages rather than the document being submitted once and approved once. Is that a fair summary of the way in which you saw this?
Yep.
Yes.
The normal process I would expect would be that it would go through, it would possibly go through a couple of iterations to tidy up and give people the opportunity to change that. So we had expected to get some form of comment, but normally after those comments are addressed, I would say that it wouldn't change again unless something happened to the building, like what we were speaking about earlier, which was the change of use or the addition of perhaps rooms that had been missed in the first instance. Mm-hmm. So once that's clarified and it goes to a B, I'm not expecting to see the thing again.
So these unusual features of the way the matrix developed, what impact did that have on the development of the design?
Well, the issue there is that if you change a brief, then we don't have a foundation to do all the necessary work that's required to do the detailed design, so that it holds all of that up.
And why do you think it was that the environmental matrix was being developed in that unusual way?
I couldn't get my head round about it. I'm influenced now by what I've learned from other parties' disclosures, if you like. But my understanding now is that the unusual process was because the document was not fully reviewed. It was let's call it cherry picking, and that's why we kept getting caught in this circle.
So you mean that when the matrix was submitted for review, what you've learned subsequently, I think was how you put it, is that the matrix wasn't being reviewed in its entirety, but just in part?
That appears to have been the case, which is, in my experience, is unusual. Because normally any document, be it drawings or be it a report or whatever, submitted to a client for review, would get a full review in its entirety, and then you would only then have to review the responses to any queries that were raised. I've been on both sides of the fence here, so I can understand the normal process.
And
my thoughts when your understanding now of this back and forward process is that during the course of the RDD process, NHSL or Mott MacDonald were not reviewing the whole of the environmental matrix, but just parts of it.
That's exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
what about my understanding now?
I'm just anxious that I'm following that. Sorry, Mr. McLeod.
no, not at all, my lord. How clear an understanding did you have of what NHS Lothian wanted from its ventilation system?
I think I was reasonably clear that what we were providing them with by way of the detailed drawings that we were submitting was what they were looking for, or what they had in mind that they would have for the hospital. Mm-hmm. Certainly, in addition, when we're speaking about the RDD process, it wasn't just simply the matrix, it was every single building services drawing, vent, heating, cooling, water, all aspects of it. So we had that process going, and the matrix being one of the issues that was being explored.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what you say in your statement at paragraph 40, which is Witness Statement Bundle 2, page 177, is that, it's his final sentence in that paragraph, that if no comment was made by NHS Lothian on an entry in the environmental matrix, this was taken as acceptance by NHSL of that entry. And do you mean, there are two ways that one can take that statement. There's either you mean that NHS Lothian accepted it met their operational functionality requirements, or you could take it as meaning something more, that NHS Lothian had in effect confirmed it as their brief. And which of those two do you mean?
The second one. I mean, submittal of any document is generally the approval is given to any item which hasn't been commented upon. Don't take this the wrong way, but that's the whole, in my opinion, it's the whole idea of why you have that process.
Okay, I'd like to turn now to a particular change that Wallace Whittle made to the environmental matrix, and this is to Guidance Note 15.
Yeah.
And that's something that you cover at paragraph 41 of your statement. And if we could go, please, to Bundle 13, Volume 2, page 101. And in fact, if we just go briefly to page 99, this is just to let you know, Mr. McKechnie, which document we're looking at.
Yeah.
This is, you can see from the version box on the left, that this is the version of the matrix, 26th of November 2015, so just a few months after financial close. Now, if we go down to the next page, please. And sorry, the page after that. And if we just have guidance note 15 at the middle of the page, please. Oh, I've lost it from my screen. I'm not sure, is there anything we can do to...
I think I understand what you're going to ask me. So.
do you have the matrix on your screen?
No.
It disappeared from my screen, but I've got it back.
Yes.
You have it there?
Yep.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, the particular issue concerns the part of guidance note 15 dealing with critical care areas, which is down towards the bottom. Yep. And if we just read there, it says critical care areas, design criteria, SHTM 0301, Appendix 1 for air change rates, 10 air changes per hour supply for isolation cubicles. And the change which Wallace Whittle made in this version of the matrix was to add those words for isolation cubicles. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what you say in your statement is that you added these words, and this is paragraph 41 of your statement, purely for clarification to align with SHTM 0301 guidance, as we felt the original text was vague. And could you just explain what you mean by that, please?
Our interpretation of SHTM 0301 was that the only areas which were called out with 10 air changes were isolation cubicles.
So
which up until the most recent change still remained the same.
Mm-hmm. So you made the change. You added the words isolation cubicles into this guidance note.
Yep.
So that it aligned with your interpretation of the guidance.
Yes.
Do you accept that if one looks at the guidance note on its own, your change narrowed the scope of the guidance note?
Not really, because what we didn't change was that the design criteria was SHTM 0301.
Mm-hmm. So it still refers to 0301, but prior to your change, it could be read as, the guidance note I'm talking about, could be read as specifying 10 air changes per hour for non-isolation rooms in critical care, just as a matter of the language.
Well, it's more than the matter of the language, because the other than the isolation rooms, there wasn't any reference in SHTM 0301 to 10 air changes within critical care bedrooms.
Yeah, so that we understand that's your interpretation of the guidance, but I think you're probably aware by now that other people have a different interpretation of the same guidance.
They did have, yes, but the guidance, I think the fact that the current SHTM now specifically calls out sleeping accommodation within critical care areas demonstrates that there wasn't guidance at the time we're speaking about.
Yes, but if we just focus for the moment on the language of the guidance note, do you accept that before you added the words about isolation cubicles, it was possible to read that as being based on an alternative interpretation of the guidance, that the recommendation for 10 air changes applied generally throughout the critical care area,
I didn't feel that way, and I still don't feel that way, that was what was it inferred by the original terminology. I just felt it was badly phrased.
Yeah. So it didn't occur to you at the time that there was another possible way of reading both the guidance note and the guidance as applying tenure changes
Not
beyond
at the time,
isolation rooms?
Not at all, no.
Yeah. I mean, viewing matters in hindsight, can you see now that the addition of the words to the guidance note narrows its scope?
Not when it references the then current SHTM. Because it's not there, as demonstrated with the fact that it's been added in.
Mm.
So it wasn't there, it wasn't referenceable at that particular time.
Okay, I mean, if we could put it this way, is the change that you made one which is justifiable only if your interpretation of the guidance is correct?
I'm not sure of the way you phrased that, but I'm going to answer yes.
So if it's the case that the guidance, properly construed, requires tenure changes throughout an entire critical care area, let's just work on that hypothesis.
Right.
By adding the words for isolation cubicles into the guidance note, you make the guidance note more restricted than the guidance. You accept that?
If that had been the case at the time, yes. But I think we're missing one of the key items there, which is that if it was intended that these other rooms were to have 10 air changes and critically 10 pascals pressure on them, it would have given it a different architectural guide on it. The structure, the layout, and all the rest of it would all have been impacted by that, and that was never briefed, as far as I'm aware.
I suppose it depends how that would have worked. If the matrix had been understood as specifying 10 air changes and 10 pascals of positive pressure, if it had been understood in that way, would it then have been the responsibility of Project Co to modify or develop the architectural design in such a way to meet that?
I don't necessarily think it would be Project Co. I can't comment on what the architectural guidance was within the reference documentation. I just know that the layout that we were working to wouldn't have worked with the 10 pascals if you applied that through. It worked for all the isolation rooms.
I mean, it's a simple point I'm trying to make, that if the designer understood the brief to be the achievement of 10 air changes per hour and a 10 pascals positive pressure, and was of the view that that couldn't be achieved with the existing architectural design, would it not then be for the ventilation designer to raise that and explain, well, you've got to change the architectural features?
2020 hindsight, possibly, but I don't believe that the 10 air changes and the 10 pascals was apparent, was let's call it a standard at that particular time. I know that we have asked repeatedly for details on other hospitals where this has been provided. I don't believe it was in existence anywhere else. It will be now in newer designs because the briefing has changed.
Yeah, okay.
Clown, if I could just intervene. The point you make, Mr. McKechnie, about the architectural consequences of assuming that what was briefed was 10 pascals positive pressure, 10 air changes an hour for the whole of the critical care area. So that would be the whole of Department B1. Now, you made a point about the architectural consequences of that. Without maybe going into too much detail, I just want to be sure that I understood your answer. Were you saying that, well, if that was what the brief required, it would require, I assume, larger air handling units or different air handling units?
Yeah.
And if you've got larger air handling units or different air handling units, then you've got to find somewhere to put them.
That's correct, yeah.
Were you meaning anything much more than that? It's just...
From an architectural point of view, the finishes within the building, within the room, space, would have to be different. You can have, for example, you've got lay-in tile grid in here, which if you pressurise this room, in simple terms, you'll lift all those tiles. So you have to increase the air tightness of the room itself. You need different light fittings. You need to beef up the building, the building structures, ceiling. So there's a lot more work,
right,
other than just the ventilation to form a pressurised room to a defined pressure.
right. And that was the point you were seeking to make.
Yes.
Right. Thank you.
Another point that the other parties make, Mr. McKechnie, is that prior to your change being made to the matrix, there was actually a conflict within the meaning of the matrix, because there was the reference here to 10 air changes for critical care areas without any restriction on it. And in the section of the matrix dealing with particular rooms, there was specification of 4 air changes per hour for the single and multi-bed rooms in the critical care department. Do you accept that the change you made removed that conflict?
Yes, that's exactly what it did, and it was one of the reasonings behind why we thought, with good intentions, we were tidying up the matrix.
So if the matrix, as you understood it, was NHSL's brief, was the conflict between these two parts of the matrix not something for them to resolve rather than you?
It should have been resolved in my mind in the first issues of the matrix. But after we, let's say, took control of the matrix, it then fell to ourselves for any changes to it.
Well, were you aware that there was a hierarchy clause in the board construction requirements which required the design to default to the most onerous standard in the event of a conflict?
Again, we didn't see it as a conflict, because when you've got the SHTM, their interpretation of it on the one side, and then you have the original client's matrix and the SHTM on the other side, that doesn't feel like a matrix. It feels more like a typographical error, if you like, or we felt it had to be clarified so that both sides of those equations aligned.
Now, if we just scroll out a little bit so we can see all of the text. A little bit further, please. And a bit more. So there we go. We can see the whole page there, Mr. McKechnie. You see that there's text throughout the guidance notes in red.
Yes.
And was it the case that the red text was to denote changes made to the matrix from the previous version?
And technical changes, yes.
The other witnesses they've put it in different ways, but one witness has said that there was an agreed protocol that any changes would be marked up.
That's yeah, I agree with that. And if you went away from the text and into the body of the matrix, where there was a change from the original matrix, which had a technical impact, then yes, that had a red text or whatever on it. That was to assist in comparing one version of the matrix to what I thought would have been the second and final one, but obviously that wasn't the case. We didn't take the view that that we were changing anything in the matrix with regard to the clause 15. Our opinion was that we were, at that time, we were tidying the document up.
And so is that your explanation for the change to guidance note 15 being in black text rather than red?
Yeah, there was nothing. We weren't trying to do anything other than get this matrix as good as it could be, if you like. There was no underhanded idea there. I wish to God somebody had put it in red now, but at the time that wasn't the case. So,
I mean, obviously, given what we know about what ultimately happened with the critical care area and the fact that the installed ventilation was removed so that the 10 air changes per hour could be achieved, in hindsight, can you understand the suggestion that the change might have been deliberately concealed?
oh, absolutely not. I could see where, like everything, you can change the emphasis on it. But what I'm saying is that there was no intent to do anything to conceal. It was more to just reconfirm what we were doing.
Mm-hmm. And you say in your statement that nobody commented on the change at the time. That's likely to be because it was in black text, nobody realised it had been made.
Yes, I get that, but I think when we looked at this before, I raised the point that Mott's in particular have commented on it, and my suggestion is that they were well aware of it. So I think there's something not as clear cut as what you're potentially suggesting there.
I mean, so if let's imagine a world in which the change had been marked in red. So the addition of the words "for isolation cubicles" had been marked in red. Do you agree that would have given Mott's and NHSL the opportunity to clarify whether indeed they meant that 10 air changes should be confined only to isolation rooms in the critical care department?
Again, 2020 hindsight, but yes, I can see that now. However, the overwhelming evidence of the guidance, the matrix, and the SHTM at that particular point in time, I don't think it should have raised anything, because I didn't believe then, and I don't believe now, that at that time 10 air changes to critical care was a blanket statement.
And you referred in passing there to Mott MacDonald being fully aware of this. Can you explain to me why you say they were fully aware of it?
They make comments on it in their last but one statement.
And are you referring there to correspondence in 2015 about the treatment of isolation rooms in critical care?
I'm referring to, there was I would need to go back and check my notes on where that is, but my understanding as I sit here was that it was in the last tranche of statements from, there was comments made by Graham Greer on this change. And it wasn't as if they just discovered it.
I'm going to refer you to some documents for 2015. So these are in Bundle 13, Volume 2, at 55. And if we, this is an email chain from 2015, and if we go back to the bottom of the chain, which is at page 57, and you can't see the top of the email, but it's from Brian Rutherford.
Yes, yeah.
Who I think is a colleague of yours at Wallace Whittle.
Yes.
Yep. To Colin Grindlay and Ken Hall of Multiplex. And subject is confirmation of isolation cubicles. And Brian says, Colin, we've noted that there are rooms on the layout drawings that are labelled as isolation cubicle room references, and then so on. There's 4 rooms in the critical care department. These rooms do not follow the standard isolation room layout as depicted within SHPN 04 Supplement 1, and therefore we would like some guidance as to their intended use and ventilation requirements. Currently we have provided supply air into the gowning lobby with a pressure stabiliser in the party wall to the bedroom and a dedicated extract within the bedroom to provide a duty of 10 air changes per hour, which will give a pressure balance. So we see there a question about the isolation rooms in critical care.
There was standard isolation rooms, and if I remember correctly, these ones were slightly different. There is a guidance on how to treat a standard isolation room, which generally has a PPVL, so a pressurised lobby, and these rooms didn't have. So we put forward, because it wasn't in guidance, we put forward our interpretation of what could apply to it.
Yes.
For approval. So that was our process. And
so, but what we see here is it's a question about isolation rooms in the critical care department, and in that context, there's a particular reference to 10 air changes per hour.
yes.
Yeah. And then if we go up through the chain, we see that, first of all, Ken Hall forwards that note on to Mock MacDonald. And then if we go up again, we will see an email from Maureen Brown of Mock MacDonald to Ken Hall at Multiplex. And she says, "Hi Ken, the board have reviewed your RFI and refer IHSL to the department's clinical output specification that contains the relevant information with regard to operational functionality, use of rooms, and ventilation requirement." And then extract from B1 PICU clinical output spec noted below. Single cubicles will be used for privacy or isolating ordinary infectious conditions. Lobbied single bed isolation cubicles are required for both source and protective isolation of patients. And they all require to have identical design of pressure control with positive pressure lobbies with filtered air and negative extraction cubicles. It's required that contaminated air must not flow back into any of the open critical care areas. It's required that the lobby must be joined to the room at the foot end of the bed. And then scrolling on, furthermore, the board's response is noted in red below. And if we scroll down, we see at the top, that's the question which Mr. Rutherford had posed. And then the answer below it is, almost all children and infants admitted to PICU HDU need their breathing to be supported by a ventilator, hence en-suite facilities are not required. The proposed solution is correct, and so on. Is this the exchange that you're talking about when you say that the issue of isolation rooms was raised with Mock MacDonald?
Yes, because we, as it says in there, we were looking for confirmation because there wasn't, we couldn't find an appropriate isolation facility within the available guidance document. So we put forward our interpretation, but we didn't. We put it forward as we did any other variation for clarification, which we got in this particular case.
I mean, I can see that this is clarification about how one treats isolation rooms in the critical care department. But what I don't understand is how it relates to ventilation parameters for non-isolation rooms in the critical care department?
We weren't querying the non-isolation rooms. We were simply querying isolation rooms, which goes back to our tidying up of the matrix note, because that's what normal guidance is. So as soon as we saw the word isolation on the architectural plans, we applied our understanding of what was required for an isolation room. The isolation rooms for, as they've explained there, are slightly different in layout to an adult isolation room.
So just so I'm clear about it, it's this exchange which you say added extra support to the approach you took to the guidance note?
Yes.
I'd like to turn now, Mr. McKechnie, to the development of the design in relation to the pressure arrangement for multi-bedrooms.
Right.
And you explain in your statement that in the financial close environmental matrix, the pressure arrangement specified for multi-bedrooms was positive pressure.
Yes.
Right. And then at a point after financial close, NHSL said that they wanted to have balanced or negative pressure in the multi-bedrooms.
Yes. Yeah.
And Wallace Whittle developed proposals to achieve that. Is that correct?
That's correct. I don't know if proposals has been interpreted as wanting to change the brief. It was more proposals of what could be done to give NHSL what they were then asking for.
Okay. So in developing these proposals, did you you'll need a page. Page 666. We have here an email from Brian Rutherford to you and representatives of Multiplex and Mott MacDonald, 31st of January 2017. And he says, "Dear all, further to last week's ventilation workshop meeting, please find enclosed a copy of our bedroom ventilation key considerations document." And then if we could go down to page 667, see a TÜV Süd document headed up bedroom ventilation key considerations.
Yeah.
And we see there that it deals with both single bedrooms and 4 bedrooms.
Yeah.
And we could just go to the section of 4 bedrooms. We see, as agreed at the workshop, we've undertaken a review of the 4 bedrooms' current ventilation design with the view to getting the rooms into a balance. We've looked at a compromise solution by increasing the ensuite and WC ventilation rates from 10 air changes per hour to 17 air changes per hour, and decreasing the room supply air from 4 air changes per hour to circa 3 air changes per hour, which would give a room balance and still maintain supply air to provide the minimum parameters in SHTM 0301 of 10 litres per second per person. So we see here that in the context of the proposal, Wallace Whittle had in mind the need to comply with SHTM 0301. Is that correct?
We always have that in mind on any ventilation system, yes.
But the proposal of 3 air changes per hour was lower than SHTM 0301 recommended for any patient space. Is that correct?
It was lower, but as we've explained there, it still meant that the SHTM has a default of 10 litres per second per occupant.
Sorry, I
So they
missed
have-
that. My fault.
Sorry, they have both parameters within SHTM. They have the preferred air change rate, but they have a default minimum rate of 10 litres per second. By So in this review, as opposed to proposal, I would suggest, in this review, we were laying out what the NHSL's potential alternatives were. And one of the alternatives, as we've explained in this, was to apply the 10 litres per second minimum.
So was it your view that it would still be compliant with the guidance?
Yes.
Notwithstanding the fact that in the table of recommended parameters at Appendix 1, the minimum recommended air change for patient areas was 6 air changes per hour.
Yes, what you've said is correct, and the client had already amended that 6 to 4. And what we were trying to do there was assist and lay and put over to them what the potential alterations could have been for them then, bearing in mind that this was at a point well down the line of the not only the designs but the construction. And basically what we were trying to do was, as we were in charge of the design, show them what could potentially be done and still stay within the guidelines of SHT MO301.
Okay, so the proposal to reduce the air changes to 3, that was Wallace Whittle's suggestion as a way to achieve NHSL's objective of balanced pressure.
It was a turnout. It wasn't that the comparison there to 3 air changes was a turnout figure, which came from applying the 10 litres per second to the occupancy levels of the rooms.
But okay, so it was a turnout figure, but it was one which emerged from Wallace Whittle's proposed solution rather than having been selected by NHS Lothian.
It was put forward to NHS Lothian as a potential.
Yep. Now, the text in your note there describes this as a compromise solution. And can you just explain why it was necessary to have a compromise solution?
It was a compromise. Fine. It was a compromise from the 4 air changes, which we were looking at staying within the parameters of SHTM, but minimising the amount of work and work by alterations to the then installed and approved ventilation systems. So it's kind of getting turned back on me. We were trying to assist people here, as opposed to coming up with something which we'd already designed it and had it signed off at the 4 air changes.
Yeah. Okay. And then if we go please to page 668. Again, this is Mr. Rutherford, 9th of February 2017. Various individuals from Wallace Whittle Multiplex and NHS Lothian, amongst others. And he says, further to our ventilation workshop on Monday, please find enclosed a copy of our multi-bedrooms ventilation amendment proposal to achieve room balance. Proposed solution to rooms identified as being of concern. So the reference there to a ventilation workshop, do you recall who was at the workshop?
I don't recall being at it myself. I may have been, but I don't recall a particular one, but almost certainly Mott's would have been there. And obviously ourselves. So I can't comment as to whether NHSL were involved in that workshop, but Ronnie may have been there at that time, I'm not sure. But irrespective of who was there at the workshop, the intent was put over to us, and that intent resulted in our review of what could be done, because to suit this change of brief.
Okay, and if we go forward to page 672, We see it headed up multi-bed rooms, ventilation amendment proposal to achieve room balance, proposed solution to rooms identified as being of concern. Now, that phrase, being of concern, what was meant by concern?
Well, it was identified to us that the concerns, that NHSL had concerns over the agreed solution in terms of the resultant pressure in the rooms.
Yeah, so the concern was NHSL's concern about the pressure.
It was
gradient.
Yes, it was about. My understanding of what happened was that the infection control had raised concerns on what the pressure relationship between the rooms and the adjacent corridors was, which at that time the room was notionally positive pressure to the corridor, and infection control, although infection control had stated that their preference was for the pressure balance between the two areas to be neutral. So at that point, in simple terms, we had more air get into the bedroom than we were extracting. So we had highlighted that there was a number of options available to them.
Was it explained to you why infection control had concerns about the pressure balance?
I think in broad terms, they were concerned about the flow of contaminated air due to patients with some form of infectious disease being in the corridor and moving back and forth. Obviously, the way I'm stuttering there, I didn't delve into the whys, simply because we never give a sounding, if you like, or advice on a clinical requirement. None of my people are qualified. We're healthcare engineers, not working to guidance. It's always been the case. So I would never get involved in any dialogue between, get involved in dialogue, but I wouldn't express an opinion on what was the most appropriate setup.
So if a health board, through its clinicians or otherwise, comes to you as the designer with an expressed preference for ventilation parameters because of their clinical needs, to what extent would you explore with them whether those parameters were correct or appropriate, perhaps a better word?
We would, in my mind, it would be and is a joint process. What the clinicians' the clinicians' needs would take priority. So I am used to dealing with clinicians who would say that they explain what they were looking for in terms of the performance and the pressure balances between different areas, for example. And then I would come up with an engineering solution to meet those preferences. It would never, ever be the other way around.
And imagine the hypothetical scenario where the clinicians or the health board come to you and say, these are the ventilation parameters we want for this space. And we've got clinical reasons for doing it. But you're aware that what's proposed is contrary to the guidance. Would you raise that with the health board, or would you regard the health board as having chosen what they wanted and that was sufficient?
Not trying to dodge a question, but it would depend on the parameters. For example, I've been involved in helping to develop pressure situations for people with highly infectious diseases. And in that instance, we've explored the SHTM, but we've also explained the workings of how applying the SHTM to that particular area would result in practical terms, and then explained that as best we could. And I don't mean any disrespect to the clinicians, but they've got their own speciality, as do I have, and sometimes they need to be led through and understand what the implications are. And it's then up to them to guide us in which way they actually want to go.
Yeah. Now,
Sorry, it's entirely my fault. I'm not quite sure that I got an answer to I've noted an answer to Mr. McClellan's question, which was hypothetically, as I noted the question, would you raise it with the clinician if what they were asking for was apparent to you as being contrary to guidance?
Yes.
You would raise that?
I would raise it, yes.
Right, thank you.
so if we just carry the hypothesis on a further step, and it has to be hypothetical because your position is that the solution developed for these rooms was compliant with the guidance. So there was, on your view, there was nothing for you to raise. But let's imagine these had, beyond question, this was a critical care area, subject to critical care recommendations for ventilation. And the clinicians came to you and said, we've looked at this, and for clinical reasons, what we've decided is we want negative pressure. But you know, for that sort of space, the guidance recommends positive pressure. Would you be saying to the clinicians, well, hang on a minute, you might think that's what you want, but you need to know that the guidance says the opposite?
Hypothetically, but factually, that never happened.
No, I appreciate
right?
that. Yeah, no.
So,
and the reason, I've just explained, the reason I'm asking the question is, to what extent you as a healthcare ventilation engineer feel able to challenge what a clinician is saying would be appropriate ventilation parameters?
I would challenge it if the particular... I come across clinicians who have their own interpretation of what they're looking for. What I have done in the past is sat down with those people and explained exactly what that means and the implications of what they're speaking about. And if I thought it was contrary to the SHTM, I would have raised that. In the non-hypothetical case in Edinburgh, we did have some contact with the clinicians, or the particularly infection, not the clinicians, but infection control more further down the line. But that that process of sitting down with the end users would, in my experience, normally have been carried out early on in the development of the design. We were presented with a reference design, and rightly or wrongly, I would have assumed that normal process had taken place prior to me getting involved.
Yeah, thank you. Now, the inquiry already knows that rooms D, E and F, if we just have the document back on screen, please, if we can. It's Bundle 13, Volume 2, page 672. We've got rooms D and E. There's also F down the page. These are the critical care rooms, or rather the rooms that are in the critical care department. When you were developing this proposal, was the fact that these rooms were in the critical care department of any significance to you?
Wasn't I don't want to say they weren't of significance. All of the rooms were of significance to us. But the part that's missing there, because we're obviously looking at who this document was intended for. This document was intended for the client NHSL team. And the couple of parts that are missing here was, one, as that document progressed, we were asked to take on board other parameters to be considered on it, such as because bearing in mind that some of these rooms had already had their ventilation system installed, so it was the severity of the alterations.
Yep.
But at that point in time, but that schedule there, I think if you refer back to Brian's email, he also included floor plans with all of these areas clearly marked. So it should have been obvious to someone reviewing that these alternative proposals where these rooms were.
Yes, no, I mean that's the question of whether others would have appreciated that these rooms were in critical care. But I'm just interested in your perspective.
We didn't single them out, no.
No, you didn't. You're just treating them in the same way as you were treating multi-bed rooms in the other departments of the hospital.
Yes, the answer there.
And
sorry, could I just add a supplementary comment there? When you said other 4 beds, this review covered all 4-bed areas. So it wasn't
in the entire hospital.
In the entire hospital. But there was 20 of them. They were then reduced to 14 that were by NHSL, 14 that had to be changed.
And we see in the proposed solution column for both rooms D and E, and it's the same for F, that what it talks about is reducing the supply ventilation down to 3 air changes per hour. And just to be clear, reducing from what?
4.
And the 4 having been specified where?
It was in the client's environmental matrix.
My lord, I note the time. I'm afraid, my fault, we've run past the normal 11:30.
Possibly by as much as 4 minutes. I don't think that's a matter for apology.
Well, it's, as far as I'm concerned, in my line of questioning, it would be a convenient point to stop if it's convenient for everyone else.
Right, if this is a convenient moment. We'll take our coffee break, Mr. McKechnie, and we'll try and be back about 10:02.
No problem at all.
Right. Mr. McLeod.
Thank you, my lord. Mr. McKechnie, before resuming on the line of questioning that we were following before the break, I'd like to return just briefly to the question of Guidance Note 15. And I think something that you said was that I think you referred to the statement of Graham Greer that had been produced for the inquiry as having confirmed that Mott MacDonald were aware of the change to Guidance Note 15. Was that,
Yes,
that was what you understood? Is that what you meant to say?
That's what I meant to say. I think it was Graham. If it wasn't Graham, it was somebody else with Mott.
If I could just bring up Graham Greer's witness statement, which is in Witness Statement Bundle 2 at page 11. And it's paragraph 24.
Yep.
And just about, it's about 6 lines from the top. There's a sentence begins halfway along the line with the word when. Do you see that, Mr.
Yes, I do, yes. Yep.
What he says is, when retrospectively reviewing Environmental Matrix Revision 2 in or around the second half of 2019, I observed that Project Co had changed the wording of Guidance Note 15. And the significance of that is that what Mr. Greer is saying is that he noticed the change to Guidance Note 15 in the second half of 2019.
Yeah, okay.
He's not saying that he noticed it at the time it was made in 2015.
Yes, I can see that. Yep.
Was this the passage that you had in mind?
That was what I had in my mind, yes. When I saw that, I didn't. I just saw the fact that it was revision 2 and that they were aware of the change.
So just so that we can clear this away, do you now withdraw the statement that there was something in Mr. Greer's statement to confirm his knowledge of the change in the guidance note at the time it was made?
At the time, yeah.
Yeah. If we could go please to Bundle 13, Volume 2, page 675. You should see on screen there an email from Brian Rutherford of Wallace Whittle to Darren Pike of Ken Hall of Multiplex and to yourself, dated the 21st of February 2017. And it reads, Darren Pike, as agreed at the meeting last Friday, see enclosed a copy of our report covering the accommodation design criteria for the single rooms and multi-bed wards. So this report is only being exchanged between Wallace Whittle and Multiplex. If we scroll down to the next document, the next page, we see there the familiar Appendix 1 from SHTM 0301. And then down to page 678, please. This is the report itself. Do you recognise this report?
I don't recall it right at this moment in time, but I would have seen it before, yes.
Okay. Well, we see the heading is accommodation design criteria, single rooms and multi-bed wards. And if we just read the opening 2 paragraphs, it says, we have carried out an internal review of the design solutions for single and multi-occupancy wards against the ventilation requirements of SHTM 0301. The recommended air change rates and pressure requirements are detailed in Appendix 1, a copy of which is attached to this report. So that's a reference to Appendix 1 from SHTM 0301.
Yes.
Yes. Then if we scroll down to the bottom of the report, next page, please. There's a conclusion there, which reads, as demonstrated above, the current designs for the single rooms and general ward areas are fully in compliance with SHTM 0301. See enclosed copy of Appendix 1 for reference. So we see that in this report, Wallace Whittle are giving explicit consideration to the compliance of the design with Appendix 1 of SHTM 0301.
Yeah.
You accept that?
Yeah, I accept that's what we're saying there, yes.
And the question really is why? If the environmental matrix was your brief, what did it matter if it complied with SHTM 0301?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, if the environmental matrix was your brief, what difference did it make whether or not it complied with SHTM 0301?
The brief or our design criteria would always have to comply with SHTM 0301.
I mean, if I can put it this way, why was the report prepared at this time, which is in 2017, addressing the compliance of the design with SHTM 0301 for these rooms?
I don't recall the circumstances where that report was, who initiated the report, or whether that had been, well, sorry, I don't recall who had initiated it, but I got to assume that somebody asked us, possibly multiplex after IHSL or whatever, had asked, and that was the purpose of that report.
Okay. And as we see, it offered the reassurance, perhaps, that the existing design proposal complied with the guidance.
Yes.
Now, if we could go back up to page 678, please. And yeah, that's fine, thank you. And if we go to the section about the current design for the single rooms and the single room WCs, what it says there is single room ventilation system is mixed mode with opening windows. Supply air change rate is 4 air changes per hour. Air change rate reduced to reflect the benefit of the mixed mode provision. So is that a reference to the reduction from 6 air changes to 4 air changes per hour?
Yes, the intent of this report would have been to clarify what we had used in our design. The 4 air changes per hour was reflective of the brief EM, which was also supported by the Hulley and Kirkwood thermal comfort analysis, which is where both of them refer to the 4 air changes.
Okay, and so reading on, it says dirty extract is via the ensuite at 17 air changes per hour.
Yeah.
Overall room pressure is balanced. And then it goes on to deal with the criteria in SHTM 0301 in Appendix 1. And it says ventilation solution can be supply and extract or fully natural. Air change rate for single room is 6 air changes per hour. Pressure balanced or negative. Is that a reference to the recommendation line in the table for single bedrooms?
Yeah.
And so do we see there that the justification for the reduction from 6 to 4 air changes per hour depends upon opening windows and an extract via the ensuite.
I don't read into that as a justification. It's, to my mind, it's more an explanation of what we have.
Yeah, so the ventilation philosophy for the single rooms is based on there being opening windows and an extract via the ensuite.
Yes. But we've never stated that there would be 2 air changes supplied via the openable windows.
No. But my question was about the single rooms in critical care. Did they have opening windows or WCs? Or ensuites, sorry.
The single rooms didn't. I think the single rooms before air changes, I think you consult the plans, but I'm pretty sure that they had a WC in them. The areas that didn't have were the isolation facilities that we spoke about just after before the break there.
Well, if I was to put it to you that if the single rooms in critical care had neither opening windows nor ensuites, would you accept that the ventilation philosophy set out here would not apply to them?
The mixed mode contribution obviously wouldn't apply, but the 4 air changes would still have applied and would still have complied with the 10 litres per second that we've spoken about.
But what would the justification be in a room without opening windows to reduce the air changes from 6 to 4?
It was never our proposal to go for 4. The 4 air changes was a reaction to the briefed air change rates.
So you're saying that because it was in the environmental matrix, you didn't have to worry about?
No, not at all. We were still had reviewed the concept and had satisfied ourselves that it's still aligned with the guidance within SHTMO 301, bearing in mind that SHTMO 301 has recommended air changes, but it also has this 10 litre per second per occupant baseline, if you like.
But it's just, if you stand back and look at what this document appears to be doing, it's assessing the compliance of the ventilation solutions for these rooms against the guidance. And it explains compliance for the single bedrooms on the basis that there are opening windows. And do you accept then that what this doesn't do is explain the ventilation philosophy for single bedrooms which don't have opening windows?
I don't make that jump, and as much as all of the single bedrooms, with the exception of the isolation facilities, were treated in the same manner.
Sorry, were
treated in the same manner. And we had, I don't know if you're coming on to this or not, but we had prepared and had a derogation on that basis.
Yes, and I mean that's really why I'm asking the question. It's about this derogation from 6 air changes to 4 air changes, and it just appears that this document is explaining the reduction to 4 air changes per hour on the assumption that the single bedrooms will have a window.
As I say, I don't honestly don't read it that way. I'd like to see the context and who had asked the question that this report is the response to. But in general terms, all the single bedrooms had been delegated on the four air changes. The fact that there's a window, to be honest, doesn't really impact on the design, because we would never infer that the opening or closing of that window, or sorry, it wouldn't be the opening, wouldn't it? That the ventilation system relied upon that to meet the SHTM requirements.
But it's that line which says supply air change rate is 4 air changes per hour, air change rate reduced to reflect the benefit of the mixed mode provision.
Yeah.
And the line above explains that the mixed mode provision is one with opening windows.
Correct, yeah.
So if the room doesn't have opening windows, what's the basis for
the four air changes would still have met the SHTM requirements for 10 litres per second per occupant.
Okay. If we then read down, there's a section headed up General Ward, and it reads, General Ward ventilation system is mixed mode with opening windows. And then supply air change rate is 4 air changes per hour, air change rate reduced to reflect the benefit of the mixed mode provision. Dirty extract is via the communal ward toilet and ensuite at 10 air changes per hour. Overall room pressure is positive, in line with SHTM 0301. And then below that, there's a reference to the SHTM criteria from Appendix 1, where it says ventilation solution can be supply or fully natural. Air change rate for general ward is 6 air changes per hour. Pressure has no specific requirement asked for. Now, is that a reference to the line in the SHTM table for general wards?
I would say so, yes.
That's the application of the criteria for general wards. Yes.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes.
Yep. And again, I'll put to you that the 4 air changes per hour is based on a ventilation philosophy which assumes that there will be opening windows and an extract via a ward toilet or ensuite.
Yeah.
And again, what would the justification be for a 4 air change rate in a part of the hospital which didn't have those features?
Again, our concern was on the design of the ventilation. The impact or otherwise of the openable windows wouldn't have affected the sizing of the ventilation installation. The reference to the mixed mode was an explanation of what we actually what we had in terms of ventilation provision.
Okay, and throughout this document, there's no reference to the parameters recommended for critical care areas. And can you just explain why not?
Because we didn't see either the 4-bed or the single bed as constituting anything as having the 10 air changes, 10 Pascals applied to it, as at that time that guidance didn't exist. And as I explained earlier, it now exists. So it leads me to conclude that it wasn't there for MD to pick up on before.
Okay. If we move forward to Bundle 13, Volume 2, at page 681.
Right.
This is a later version of the Wallace-Whittle proposal. And we see down at the bottom, this is issue 3 from February 2017, 22nd of February 2017.
Yep.
The first thing to note is that the heading has changed. Before it said multi-bed rooms, but now it says general ward. And do you know why that change was made?
The rooms identified as being of concern. Is that what you're referring to? The head?
No, the heading in blue, where it says general ward. in previous versions it had said multi-bed rooms.
I don't know why that was changed. I don't know if it was just obviously this this particular table or the review had been back and forth by that time, and that's why you'll see it's now got additional columns added to it with the severity of the works and whether the ductwork was fabricated or not, which was not in the earlier version.
I mean, I just wondered
but it's still the same. I believe that is either still the same rooms as with the 20 I was referring to, or I don't know if this is the revised version which had the 14 rooms identified by NHSL as the rooms which were of particular concern to them, because there was a distillation.
I think we'll come to that. I think we'll come to that later. This version still has 20 rooms in it.
Right.
But my focus for the moment is on the heading where it now refers to general ward. And I just wondered if that change reflects the fact that general ward is a particular category within the guidance table at the back of SHTM 0301, whereas multi-bed room is not.
I can't think of why. I can't think of the reasoning behind the slight amendment other than the fact that it's an entirely different report.
Well, one reason...
And somebody's given it a different heading, that's all. I mean, it's still the same room numbers that we're speaking about, so everything else in it has remained the same, except, as I say, we have amended it to add in the columns about the severity and the whether it was ductwork was fabricated or not.
Well, one reason for the change might be if the approach to the ventilation solution for these rooms was being developed in implementation of the parameters recommended in the general ward category of the table at the back of SHTM 0301.
I'd need to look at the comparison of the two of them, but I kind of suspect that the proposed solution has remained the same from both of those reports.
I'll put it this way. Was the proposal developed on the assumption that all of these rooms were to be treated as general wards for the purposes of SHTM guidance?
The discussions around the wards was based on what we would have to do to them to change the pressure balance between them, which was the overriding factor, which, as I say, I think had been raised by infection control. But they then, and that was what's detailed there is what the implications of that would have been on each and every four-bedded area.
It's just a sequence of events, Mr. McKechnie. We have the report we looked at a moment ago specifically applied the guidance for general wards to the multi-bed rooms. And then the next version of this table is produced with a change in the heading to use the phrase general ward, which is the recognised category from the guidance. And it just appears that what's happening here is that a decision has been taken to develop the solution for these rooms in accordance with the guidance that applies for general wards.
Sorry, but I'm not seeing this any sinister link in there.
I'm not suggesting there is a sinister link.
Well, the way it's coming across. Anyway, I think what I'm saying is that the proposed solution that's detailed in this, which was a solution to provide the air pressure. Now, in these initial reviews, there was no suggestion I can recall about air changes were secondary. It was the pressure that was at the heart of what infection control were looking at, and these were suggested solutions, which I believe stayed the same within the two reports.
Okay, and you've mentioned before that this, by the time we get to this version of the proposal, there are new columns added on the severity of the works and whether or not ductwork had been fabricated. Could you just explain why these were added?
They were added by direction, I believe, from NHSL. And what I believe was inferred by that was the severity of the works was obviously to help them. Now, I'm not saying this was definitive, but my own take on that was it was to help them make a commercial decision as to whether they instructed these alterations to be made.
Yeah.
So, particularly bearing in mind that, as you'll see from the right-hand column, ductwork was either installed or had been fabricated off-site. But the only reason for querying that is, to my mind, there's more cost involved there. So I've always found that an oddity.
So, in short, to give effect to the preference for balanced pressure at this stage of the project was going to involve cost. And is that right? Going to involve cost to implement it?
Absolutely, aye.
I think the inquiry's already heard evidence that there was perhaps a disagreement between the parties about who was going to bear that cost. But
might have been, but that wasn't part of our remit, if you like, in those discussions. We didn't take.
That would be conducted further up the chain.
Multiplex IHSL and the NHSL. All we were asked to do was to give them as full a picture as possible, and that's where these severity and what the then state of play was.
Okay, if we could go to page 684 in that bundle, please. And this is an email from Ken Hall to various recipients, the 27th of February 2017.
Yeah.
And he says, confirmation of the essential / non-essential room discussion recorded at the meeting last Friday, 24th of February 2017. And then if we go forward to the next page, and sorry, the next page after that. I think this was maybe what you were referring to a moment ago. We see a marked up version of your proposal report.
Yeah.
And we see on that page that there are some rooms where there's a handwritten annotation saying essential, and if we look further down through the document, we'll see that some of them are marked as non-essential. And just what was your understanding of what that denoted?
My understanding was that from the NHSL MOTS review, they only wanted us to change the essential ones, which again I find difficult to get my head round about.
Why do you find it difficult to get your head round about it?
Because I would have expected a commonality of solution to these areas. But so we end up with 6 of the multi-bedrooms which don't align with the pressure that they're speaking about now. That was an obvious change of the brief.
Maybe you wouldn't have known if this wasn't being discussed at your level, but might it reflect the fact that there was cost associated with this proposal, and so a decision was being made about the rooms in which it really mattered?
I don't think it takes even the brain of a simple building services guy to come to that conclusion.
And all right. So whilst this proposal is under discussion throughout 2017, there are also exchanges about the environmental matrix. It was being submitted and considered through the RDD process.
Yeah.
And if we go, please, to Bundle 13, Volume 2, page 1045. We see down at the bottom there, Mr. McKechnie, an email from Ken Hall to recipients at Mott MacDonald and Multiplex, and also Mr. Curry from NHSL. And the subject heading refers to the RDD review of the environmental matrix. This is the 20th of September 2017. And what Mr. Hall says is, Camille, Stewart, and I think that is a reference to you, Stewart is insistent that the meeting he requested to go over the comment still be held so we can get full agreement at the meeting with all stakeholders. And then if we go up to the top of that email, please. We have Mr. Hall to same recipients. This is on the 26th of September 2017. He's saying, Thursday the 28th suits Wallace Whittle. Intention is to go through all comments made, the Wallace Whittle response, and get full agreement to close this out. Now, insofar as this refers to you and wanting to get full agreement and to go through the comments and so on, can you just explain what that was about?
I was becoming quite frustrated and agitated that we weren't bringing the environmental matrix to conclusion. I offered on a number of occasions to do a line-by-line review, and that was influenced by the fact that we were on site by this time, and the installations were being installed. The drawings which preceded that installation had gone through the RDD process and had been approved, but we still hadn't brought the environmental matrix to a conclusion, which just seemed a disconnect to me. And you'll see by a number of the revisions that were on it, it just kept going back and forth and back and forth.
Yep. I think ultimately 11 revisions.
We did 11. I'm sure it's in my statement somewhere, but I think we submitted to RDD 5 or 6 of them. So it wasn't the full 11, but nonetheless, the 11 reflects that there was this ongoing revision to it, which shot right through the construction period, which it was obvious that I would be getting, apart from I felt that my resources were getting used, I wanted to bring it to a conclusion.
Yep. And if we can go then to page 1048 in that bundle, please. This is an email from Ken Hall to various recipients, and the subject is the Environmental Matrix meeting on the 28th of September 2017. Now, you're not copied into this, so you may, I don't know if you'll have seen this before, but at item 2.0, Mr. Hall says the following: TÜV-SÜD requested a review line by line. Mott noted if TÜV-SÜD can confirm a check has been made line by line, then there was no requirement to do a line by line check. TÜV-SÜD confirmed the line by line check had been carried out in their office. Item closed. Now, so it says here that TÜV-SÜD had carried out a line by line review. Had that been done?
Yes.
And specifically a review of what?
It was a review of the contents of the matrix at that particular moment in time. The anomaly there is that we had reviewed that we had addressed all of the comments that we had received up until that date, but that we were still conscious that there was a process which seemed to bring up more comments every time we submitted, and we could only review what we had. But in an attempt to break this pattern, I suggested that both parties sat down and just went through the whole document. Now, interestingly, whilst that was rejected, I have seen from the current statements that I think it was Lindsay Guthrie that said that she carried out a line-by-line review with Mott's, but this was well after all of this. So
yeah, so I mean, I think we can refer to Ms. Guthrie's statement about that. I think she may have been talking about something that was done in 2019 rather than.
It was, yes. It was much after. It was much later than what we're speaking about here.
Yep.
But nonetheless, I took it there was a realisation that it was a potential way to go.
Okay, so in terms of the line-by-line review that Who've Sued had carried out and what the review was for, what I understood you to say was that it was to check the environmental matrix took account of all comments that had been made on it by or on behalf of the board.
Yes, aye.
Did it involve a check that the matrix parameters complied in all respects with applicable guidance?
We'd already done that, and again, as I tried to explain earlier, the RDD process is normally that any follow-on review is by exception.
So those reviews having been carried out, were you satisfied that the matrix reflected the comments that had been made and a solution that was compliant with the applicable guidance?
As the matrix stood at that particular time, that's correct. But what I was trying to forestall was receiving additional comments, which I would then have to revise the matrix about, because that was a process that continued to be happening.
And why had you wanted Mott MacDonald to participate in the line-by-line review?
Mott's, my interpretation of Mott's, and certainly the way the review meetings went, was that Mott's were the technical advisor.
And so what role, just to be explicit about it, what role did you expect them to perform in the line-by-line review?
To basically agree that the parameters that we had then recorded in the matrix was the client's brief. I didn't expect the review to be primarily Mott's, but I did expect them to lead any line by line, just as they led the RDD process.
And when Mott MacDonald said that was unnecessary, what did you take from that?
I kind of gave in a wee bit of that. I tried my best to try and get past this deadlock, but there didn't appear to be any acceptance of that on the other side. I didn't know what else to do, so we just kept in this process.
Okay. And if we read down to the next note, note 3.0, feedback from Mott, subject to the 11 clarifications required for revision 10, this concludes the review of the matrix. Did you take any comfort from that?
Yes, it appeared that with that receiving that feedback had finally put the matrix into a place that we weren't going to continue this process of constant revision.
And then, just for completeness, note 4.0.
Sorry, before that, could I again say that wasn't my first offer of a review. I'd already made that offer very early on in the process. So it wasn't a one-off. It was a continued suggestion of how to get past this blockage.
And
sorry,
was the Mott MacDonald response to the offer the same at each point?
Yeah.
And I was just going to say for completeness that item 4 in Mr. Hall's note records that multi-bedrooms had not been discussed at that meeting and that the matrix would require to be updated once the changes are instructed. And does that simply reflect the fact that the proposal for the multi-bedrooms was still under discussion or development?
Absolutely. That's what Ken's suggesting there.
And if we go, please, to Bundle 13, Volume 2.
Mr. McClellan, if I may, before we leave that email, just again, really to make sure that I've understood your answers, Mr. McKechnie, you confirmed that, as is stated in the email, a line-by-line check had been carried out by your office. And as I've noted Mr. McClellan's question, it was that line-by-line a check had been to check the environmental matrix against all the comments that you'd received. And as I've noted Mr. McClellan, he said you were satisfied that the environmental matrix, as at that date, reflected all the comments made and the guidance. Have I noted, and I understood you to agree that?
Yes, but the slight clarification I would give there was that at that point, the review against the guidance would have been carried out internally by us at a much earlier time. Therefore, as per the normal review, RDD review process, I was saying that we'd carried out a line-by-line review of the comments that had been made and we'd addressed them. So in other words, we felt that the matrix was as up-to-date as it could possibly be against everything that we'd received.
Right. I think what I was taking from the email and your answer was that this was a relatively recent exercise that had been carried out.
Only on addressing the comments.
Only on the comments.
We had previously reviewed all of all of the design criteria we had met with guidance. So we felt we had a completely up-to-date document.
Right.
So it wasn't, just to clarify that, it wasn't that this was our first dip into reviewing the matrix against guidance.
Right. So do I take from that at some stage, in respect of one or other of the versions of the environmental matrix, your office had gone through, when I say line by line, I'm imagining literally line by line, to check the parameters in the environmental matrix as it then stood conformed with your understanding of guidance, or have I gotten that wrong?
No, that's correct. But it wasn't just, kind of just before.
Yes, it wasn't just in October 2017, but at some earlier point.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, my lord. If we could go, please, to Bundle 13, Volume 2, page 1242. And we're moving forward about 7 months, Mr. McKechnie. We see here an email from Ken Hall to you and others, subject heading 12th of April 2018, 4-bed workshop summary. So I take it to be a note of the outcome of that meeting. And Mr. Hall heads it up, confirmation of key points discussed. And then at point 1, he says, SM, which I take to be Stewart McKechnie, noted concerns on agreement from the previous workshop number 1 that the objective of workshop number 2 was to obtain agreement in principle on the draft drawings being tabled to allow progress to continue on 4-bed design. This was due to NHSL held up at another meeting and no delegated authority at the workshop. Then below that, action, concerns resolved as Ronnie Henderson joined the workshop at 13:30. Now, first of all, what were your concerns from the previous workshop?
My concern at that time was the fact that we were
attending a meeting to resolve all of the particular workshop actions, and we didn't have anybody there from NHSL. So Ken's note is quite correct, because I would have opened the meeting saying, there's nobody here for NHSL, guys. How are we going to bring this workshop to a sensible conclusion? And then, as it says, Ronnie turned up half an hour later.
And so what did you understand to be Mr. Henderson's authority at the meeting?
He was the NHSL, I think, sole representative, but the so he'd have been there for NHSL, and I think it's strange the terminology getting used here, because it's not a minute as such, so it doesn't appear to record the actual parties that were there.
Well, I
think Ken's notes. Ken's very pragmatic, and I think he was just, at that point, I'd have been banging the table saying, "What am I here for, boys?"
Yeah. Okay. And so did you understand then that Mr. Henderson had decision-making authority for NHSL in relation to the matters that were discussed at that meeting?
Oh, I assume so, yes.
In relation to the attendees, Mr. McKechnie, if we can go to page 1246. And we have there what bears to be a list of the attendees at that meeting, just so that you're aware of that. So we can see there's Ken Hall from Multiplex, and I think Andrew McCall, Douglas Anderson, Colin McRae, and Camille Kolacek from Mott MacDonald.
Yeah.
Ronnie Henderson from NHSL, and yourself from TÜV Sud. So what you thought was right, that Ronnie Henderson was the only representative of the health board at that meeting. So if we go back, please, to 1242. And item 2 reads, rooms in question tabled based on the previous revision 5 schedule, rooms cross-reference drawings against the schedule, see attached schedule and drawings overviewed. So that reference there to revision 5 of the schedule, is that to Wallace Whittle's proposal for the multi-bed rooms?
I would expect so, because it also records that there's 14 rooms in question, which is what the previous review had filtered it down to.
Now, if we read down to item 6, NHSL confirmed agreement in principle to the strategy tabled, and so on. What did you understand the strategy tabled to be?
Well, my understanding would have been, now I'd need to check revision 5, whether it was the same description of works and that we looked at in the earlier table, but whatever that then current description of works, which we had put forward, my interpretation of that was that we had to take that description and change it into engineering drawings.
So in short, did you understand NHSL to be agreeing to the multi-bedroom proposal?
Absolutely, yep.
And to what extent did you understand them to be agreeing to it? And could I just put to you explicitly, did you understand them to be, that their approval was confined to confirmation that it met their operational functionality requirements?
My interpretation, as I say, operational functionalities is a new expression to me, but at that particular time, and I don't see any difference, to be honest. The fact that they had agreed in principle to the strategy meant that I was then given clear direction that I could develop that strategy
and incorporate it in revisions to my installation drawings, which would have then had to go through the RDD process to get their acceptance of what we were saying transformed into engineering alterations or whatever that was required.
Okay, so to be fair, the note records that it was agreement in principle, and so your understanding was that you could then get on with developing the detailed documents,
yes,
reflecting it go through the RDD process.
Certainly the detailed drawings, but then, because at that point we've recorded what the implications are, and then we have to change that in engineering terms into ductwork size increases, routing, and all of that kind of thing, which is what our drawings convey.
Okay. And at item 7, it reads spare capacity. TÜV tabled the initial draft assessment, and then it says supply, no impact is being maintained at 4 air changes per hour as per the environmental matrix.
Yeah.
So does that reflect a discussion at the meeting about the 4 air change parameter?
During the course of the developing these solutions, we had initially used the 10 litres per second per occupant, which we were then, in the various reviews of that document, where we had demonstrated that we demonstrated at one point what we could do by applying the 10 litres per second. But as you saw from the first report, that lowered the air change rate down to 2.9, something like that. We then increased or left the air change rate as it was at that particular time at the 4. And we made alterations to the extract. So by boosting the extract, we kept the amount of supply there, so we boosted the extract to we achieved a balance. Okay.
If we could then go to Bundle 13, Volume 2, page 1235. So this is an email dated the 13th of April 2018, so it's the day after that meeting.
Yeah.
And it's from Brian Rutherford at Wallace Whittle to representatives of Multiplex and copied to you. Subject, 4-bed ward, revised ventilation. And then what Brian Rutherford says is, see enclosed a copy of the revised ward ventilation proposals to achieve a room balance at 4 air changes per hour. So does that reflect the idea of maintaining the air changes at the 4 stated in the environmental matrix?
That's correct, yeah.
And then if we go please to Bundle 13, Volume 2, page 1255. We have an email there from Ronnie Henderson to you and Ken Hall of Multiplex and others. It's the 18th of April 2018. And he's saying, hi Ken, I note the attached schedule, revision 5, still refers to air change rates between 2.7 and 3.5. We are seeking design for 4 air changes to all 14 rooms. Can you confirm that this is the brief to Wallace Whittle? And so I think, as we've just seen, by the time Mr. Henderson sent that email, Wallace Whittle had already prepared a proposal at 4 air changes per hour.
Yeah.
Correct? Yeah. And then at page 1258, we have Ken Hall's reply to Mr. Henderson's email. And he says, hi Ronnie, 4 air changes per hour is the brief, supply and extract, and so on. And who was responsible, in your view, for the choice of 4 air changes per hour for these rooms?
It's not so much the 4 air changes was already our design proposal, and as it was spoken about, it was what was contained within the matrix, etc. The maintaining the 4 air changes was, I understand that, to not dropping down to and using the 10 litre per second alternative. My understanding of that was NHSL, and who were in charge of that, and probably instructing Mott's that that's what they wanted.
Okay, so do you accept then that when Mr. Henderson asks for 4 air changes per hour, he's coming at that from the perspective that he wants something higher than the 2.9 or 3 air changes that had been proposed in the earlier versions of the proposal?
I think we need to clarify the wording of proposal, because what we had produced was, here's the minimum alterations that we think we could make to the existing system. And as we've seen from the previous versions of that schedule, that was on the back of, in a lot of these areas, the ductwork was already installed. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't, if you like, a fresh proposal by us. I think, with hindsight, maybe we should have used an alternative name. It was a response to what we understood the client was now requiring these rooms to be serviced to.
Okay, I mean, that's understood. My question is really that about Mr. Henderson, and when he's asking for 4 air changes, what he's trying to do is to increase it from what had been set out in the response, the Wallace-Whittle response.
So why did he do that?
Sorry?
Why did he do that? Is that what you're asking me?
No, I'm just, if one looked at the email from Mr. Henderson in isolation, you might have the impression that he was choosing 4 air changes as his...
Well, certainly it was a client or board decision to retain the 4 air changes. They'd been offered options, and of the options they selected to maintain the 4.
Mm-hmm. But he's doing that to increase the number of air changes from what had been under discussion.
He's doing that. He's doing that as a response to a potential solution. So there was no physical increase at that point in time. It was basically keeping the status quo on the supply air.
Yes. If you could go through your witness statement, please. It's witness statement bundle number 2 at page 180. And it's paragraph 52. I'm just reading what you say there. NHSL wish to explore the potential consequences involved when changing from 4 air changes within bedrooms, as set out in the environmental matrix and accepted design drawings, and designed 10 air changes from the adjacent bathrooms. Mm-hmm. Now, just when one reads that, one might get the impression that you were saying that NHSL were driven by a desire to change the air change rates. But I think from what we've discussed today, you'd accept that actually what they were primarily motivated by was the achievement of a balanced pressure arrangement in the multi-bedroom.
Absolutely. This whole review process was driven by the pressure relationship between the bedrooms, the wards, 4-bed wards, whatever you want to call them, and the adjacent corridor.
Okay, and then reading on, you say, we were advised that as part of our review, we could consider reducing the 4 air change supply rate to 120 litres per second, which would align with the building standards vent rate for 12 occupants. And you've alluded to that today, but who was it that came up with the idea of reducing the 4 air change supply?
My recollection was it was Ronnie Henderson, but I would have received that via probably via multiplex. At the briefing, if you like, we were getting advised that they wanted to change the criteria.
Because if one looks at the documents, the first reference in those to a reduction in the air changes below 4 comes in the Wallace-Whittle proposal for the multi-bed rooms. Do you mean by this to suggest that the idea had come from somebody else before it went into your document, or was it something that Wallace-Whittle themselves had come up as the way to achieve the
No, my recollection was that there was open discussion between the parties as to what NHSL wanted the pressure regime to be. We would probably have suggested to them that there was an alternative way of, meeting the SHTM requirements from air changes to the 10 litres per second. Who that came from, quite honest with you, I don't know whether that was a suggestion from NHSL or whether it was us suggesting an alternative way of doing it, both of which would have been compliant with SHTM 03.
Okay. Then if we go please to Bundle 13, Volume 2, page 1268. So this is it's revision 6 of the Wallace-Whittle proposal. If we go please to page 1270, we can see from the stamps there, Mr. McKechnie, that this is the version that was approved by NHSL at level B. You see that stamp?
Yes. Yep.
And there are some handwritten comments which I think we take to be Brian Curry's because it's the same colour of pen as his signature. And the second comment is about rooms with the B1 room code. So it's a comment about the rooms in critical care. See that?
Mm-hmm.
And what he says is that rooms D, E and F do not have en suites. Then if we go back up to page 1268, and if we look at the text for either room D or room E, and it's the same in F, it now reads, retain the supply ventilation at 4 air changes per hour and the en-suite ventilation at 10 air changes per hour. So there's reference there to en-suites.
Yeah.
And that hadn't appeared in earlier versions of this document. So do you know why that wording was added?
To be honest with you, no, I don't.
Was it anything to do with the role of en-suites in the mixed mode ventilation solution?
I wouldn't think so, no. I need to take that away and have a wee look at the compare the previous versions of it. It looks like there's an error there that we shouldn't have mentioned extract for the en-suite.
I mean, this comes in the 6th revision of this document, so somebody must have had a good reason for putting it in.
Sorry, I can't explain because what I'm looking at is that they've got the description of the solution says to introduce new general extract ductwork and grills into the room to provide 4 air changes overall, which would have achieved the balance that we were speaking about in terms of would have achieved what NHSL was looking for, which was a balance between the supply and the extract. So I don't know why that line would have been in, because it's, as Brian's picked up on, that particular part of it would appear to be incorrect, but the correct solution is within that description as well.
It's just, we saw the document earlier which explained the philosophy behind the multi-mode ventilation solution as including extract via en-suites. You remember that document we looked at?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only explanation I can think of for the appearance of these words here, that was intended to connect up the solution for these multi-bed rooms with that ventilation philosophy. Does that?
I don't think so. Personally, I'm thinking when I'm reading this, it's a cut and paste job where somebody's forgot to take out that first opening statement. Okay. Because, as I say, the solution of introducing the new general extract into the room to provide for air change overall is the solution that was adopted.
Okay, and then if we go to Bundle 13, Volume 2, page 1279, this is revision 7 of the proposal, and if we just go to page 1282, we can see that this is the version approved by NHSL at level A.
Yes.
On the 26th of July 2018. And if we just go back up to page 1279, we can see rooms D, E and F there. The reference to the en-suites has been removed again.
Yeah.
So does that reflect the fact that there weren't en-suites in the critical care rooms?
That's correct, yeah.
So if we just stand back, we've looked at the development of this proposal. I'm using that term just because it's the one in the heading.
Yeah.
We've seen that evolve over several months. And throughout all of the discussions about that proposal, was there any discussion that you recall about the fact that 4 of the rooms were in the critical care department?
No, I don't recall that at all. My recollection was that this was a global reference to 4-bed areas.
And the understanding of some of the other witnesses who were involved in those meetings is that all of the multi-bed rooms were being treated through the development of this proposal just as general wards. And did your design proposal for them proceed on that basis?
Yes, because as I said, other than the current guidance, there was no guidance whatsoever in the SHTM which suggested that those rooms had to be treated in any other way.
And so was there any discussion at that time of the possibility that because these rooms are in the critical care department, they might, under the SHTM guidance, be subject to different recommendations for air change and pressure parameters?
I think I could definitively say no, that was never up for discussion.
And did that possibility ever occur to you, or so far as you know, anyone else at Wallace Whittle?
Absolutely not. I don't want to keep repeating this because I'll just blow the pants off of everybody, but that guidance didn't exist in the SHTM.
And in putting the proposal together, to what extent did you take into account the intended clinical use of these rooms?
We wouldn't have made any assumptions on the clinical use. We'd never do that. We take guidance from in this case, the end client, which would have either been for the NHSL themselves direct or via MOTS.
I mean, did you take account of the fact that in a critical care department, the patients being treated there might be expected to be more vulnerable than patients in other departments of the hospital?
I didn't have a view on that. My current view is that's one of the reasons why we have isolation rooms, or had isolation rooms at that time. But that's only in layman's terms. I would express that view.
Okay. You just bring up your statement, please. Witness statement bundle 2 at page 180.
Excuse me, before you go there, can I also, at this point, bring in the fact that once all this came out, we reviewed all the available Scottish health guidance on critical care, and we still can't find anything that's relating to treating the non-isolation areas as any different from any other area.
Mm-hmm. I think I've seen a document that your firm has put together, which sets out the consideration that you've given to it.
Yep.
That's a document that you've submitted to the inquiry.
There's 2 reports.
Yes.
Which we went through that.
Yes.
What I'm trying to say is, I was trying to indicate that aligns with our and any other healthcare designer, is that we design to what's directed. We don't make assumptions on any clinical matters at all.
Yes. Now, if you just look at the paragraph on your witness statement on screen, paragraph 51, and what you say is, I understand from the inquiry that NHSL wanted to cohort children with similar infections together in the same rooms, and that to prevent the spread of infections from those rooms, it was necessary for the rooms to have a negative pressure relationship to adjoining spaces. This reasoning was not provided to us at the time, either at the original briefings, nor as part of the RDD process. And I just want to ask you, are you sure your recollection about that is correct?
Yeah, absolutely. But the only thing I would clarify a wee bit is that the RDD process obviously had to be repeated on those drawings or the ventilation once the all of the alterations which we had to detail from that agreement had been put before. Maybe I should have said it's part of the original RDD process.
The evidence of Janice McKenzie, who was the NHSL clinical director on the project, to this inquiry earlier this week, was that she recalls telling you in a meeting about the plan for cohorting children together. Do you disagree with that, or do you not remember?
It depends on the time frame. It certainly wasn't in the original discussions when we were developing the original designs. She may have a recollection of a discussion with me once the whole scenario of providing the balanced air situation was mooted. I don't recall Janice ever been involved in early discussions on the ventilation.
So just to be clear about that, so I missed part of what you said. Are you accepting that it's possible at some stage during the development of the multi-bedroom proposal that Janice McKenzie told you about the cohorting plan, or are you saying that didn't happen?
No, what I'm saying is if it did happen, I don't remember the specific discussion, but if it had happened, I'm pretty certain it would have happened when the whole issue of the achieving the balanced ventilation system within the 4 beds, because we had a lot of discussion with the NHSL, and there was a lot of people involved in that. So it'd be quite. I'm assuming that at some point in time they would have told us quite openly why they wanted it. So I'm assuming that I'm not saying that discussion didn't happen. All I'm saying is no way did that happen at the early part of it.
Okay, so I think you're accepting the possibility that might have come up sometime maybe in 2017 when the NHSL proposal for balance pressure arose.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the final question, and I'm conscious of the time. if it was put to you that the technical solution for the multi-bed rooms was agreed on the basis that NHS Lothian were relying on Wallace Whittle to ensure that the solution complied with the SHTM guidance, does that reflect your understanding or not?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, my lord, I apologise for having gone 10 minutes beyond the expected time. That may be a convenient place to break.
No need to apologise. So these are all your questions for Mr. McKechnie, did you say, or are you suggesting a lunch break?
I'm suggesting a lunch break. I'm afraid I have more for Mr. McKechnie.
Right. Could I just again confirm that last answer? Mr. McLennan said to put you a proposition that NHS Lothian was relying on Wallace Whittle. Now, actually, now forgotten what, because I haven't finished noting that. My memory is that for compliance, but perhaps if you could put the question again, Mr.
Yes, I can. The question was, if I was to put to you that this technical solution for the multi-bed rooms was agreed on the basis that NHS Lothian were relying on Wallace Whittle to ensure the solution complied with the SHTM guidance, do you agree with that?
Answer is yes. Still.
Still saying yes. Right. We'll take lunch break and we'll sit again maybe about 2:15.